morning, Vietnam. Ha! I always wanted to do that. This is welcome back, everybody, to the Pony Express. What do we call this thing? Pony Express Radio Hour. Red Hawk is not here, and no one else is either, except me, your host today, Christopher Sandbatch. We are going to be talking about a lot of fun stuff, but let me just go ahead and introduce everybody. I think many of you know Grant Brooks, who is here to spurg out with us in one of the most unplanned episodes of Pony Express ever. How are you doing tonight, Grant?
Doing very well. How about you?
I'm doing about as well as ever, about as well as I could potentially be doing given the circumstances. I've just spent most of the last week on the road in some of the strangest places I've ever been, but I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that in a little bit. But let's get to the man of the hour, the man who's actually a guest. We have Thomas Wayne Riley here from the American Southwest podcast. How are you doing?
Great. How are y'all doing?
Wonderful. What have you been up to? We can do Grant in a minute, but yeah, but tell us who you are, what you've been up to.
So I am the president of the New Mexico chapter, the Regulators of the Rio Grande. I am running for county commissioner now. I have a history show. Just wrapped up a series on Zebulon Montgomery Pike, and I got a family, a home, having a great time.
Yeah, that's one of Zebulon Montgomery Pike. See, look, I theoretically have a history degree, but this is the Confederate invasion of New Mexico. Is that correct?
No, I did an 11-part series on that last year. Zebulon Montgomery Pike was a spy sent by Governor and General Wilkinson and kind of Thomas Jefferson to get arrested in Santa Fe in 1806. But it was a really cool journey across the plains. And then he got carried down to Chihuahua and then straight across Texas, and he spied the whole time.
You know, that actually sounds like that's a much more interesting story.
He's the man that Pikes Peak is named for, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
Well, I had that much figured out. Like, I knew that. And it's again, I promise everyone, I am an expert in history, and what we're here to talk about today is something totally unrelated and certainly not regionally applicable to any of the places we've been talking about already, and that I theoretically know anything about. And what we're going to be our subject today loosely is the Battle of the Alamo, which is it happens between the Civil War and this Zebulon Pike stuff, but it's still generally the same sort of trajectory. But if we're going to be totally honest, we're going to have to lean on both of you all to help with the actual history, because first of all, have either of y'all been to the Alamo?
I have.
Not in a very long time. Sorry, go ahead.
So, but what does not in a very long time mean? This is a yes or no question.
What this means is that I was brought there as a heritage trip. I have ancestors who fought in the Alamo, so I did the donning a Stetson and putting my hand on the wall of the Great Anglos, but I don't remember it at all.
Yeah. And when were you there, Riley?
I was there 2 years ago.
Yeah. I have been, again, despite the fact that I promise you, I am in fact an expert in history. The only time I've been to the Alamo was a trip. I guess it was before the pandemic, because the memory of it's kind of hazy. But I was already certainly involved up to my gills in whatever it is we're doing here, because I managed to get myself kicked out of the Alamo. Because for really the dullest thing imaginable, but I was taking pictures, and the way the Alamo was presented to me, and if you ever go down there, it's just like right around the corner from I think a really nice Freemasons Lodge, right there in the heart of downtown San Antonio. You will find the Alamo, and it's one of these things that people will tell you all the time. It's like not as big as I thought it would be, and my actual initial thought was like, wow. How big did people think it was going to be? Because as somebody, I've spent a lot of time around Spanish missions, growing up in Louisiana, and I've seen a lot of them, and they're usually not very impressive. That one you could at least reliably tell was at some point a Spanish mission, but you have to stand in a long line to get in there. And I was standing in this long line, and we were waiting. Everybody's talking about Alamo stuff, and we finally get inside, and I'm like, cool. I take out my phone and take a picture, and at that exact moment, an overweight, and the kind of overweight dude that tucks their uniform polos into their blue jeans, kind of muffin tops it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
This big fat Mexican dude that works at the Alamo started trundling towards me, and I could tell because he never broke eye contact the whole time he was approaching me, and I was like, "What have you done now, man?" And he comes up to me, and he's like, "This is a sacred space. You can't take pictures here." And the whole time I'm taking pictures, like chink 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 chink, because I looked at him and I said, if this is a sacred space, why are Mexicans allowed inside it? And I got kicked out immediately. So that's my Alamo story. That's my Alamo story.
That's a good one.
So you two that know more about the Alamo than me, I'm just really sort of riding along. You all can get us started, and then I'll interject and bring us drastically off course. And Red Hawk is not here to rein me back in.
I got a little bit of like family stories about it. So I know and I've seen the John Wayne film. I mean, that's almost insulting to say. It was a good film, but I'm not a expert either. I just know the general story and sort of the story of Anglo settlement in Texas. We are invited to Texas. We don't just show up until after the invite is extended anyway. And this is something that is often neglected in this story, at least the way that I have heard it told by many people, that the Mexican government, which had gained its independence like very, very shortly before this event, I think this is like 1820s or so, they invite Anglos to settle Texas. And they're looking for Catholics, like Anglo Catholics, but the translation, the game of telephone, it doesn't quite make it. So a whole bunch of us show up for the cheap land and the frontier spirit, dare I say.
So when I was asked to come on this show, I immediately put on my history podcast hat and I wrote 11,000 words that started in 1805. And so I am pretty well versed in the Alamo as of yesterday morning.
Tell us what the Alamo was. What was the Alamo? What is the Alamo besides a rental car company, besides a budget rental car company? What is the Alamo and when did it happen?
In 1750, Franciscan friars built a mission. And it was in use until 1793 when they built a much better church in San Antonio de Bexar. And so they abandoned it. And then after the Mexican Revolution, so we're talking early 1820s, right before Moses Austin got his colony. And actually the Spanish crown allowed Moses Austin to make a colony. And the new Mexican Republic honored it. But he died before he could get there. So Stephen F. Austin, his son, started that. But the Alamo was actually called the Alamo at that time because it means cottonwood. And there's nearby cottonwoods because of that little San Antonio River. And so it was a mission. It went in after 1793, it shut down. They moved to the church in the big city. And then the Mexicans made it a garrison and a barracks and an armory.
All right, so that explains
and at
what
that
happens.
Time,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you got it.
Well, so at what time then, it's a garrison and an armory, at what time does it become relevant to the Anglo settlers? I know a little bit about part of the reason why it was desired that they would settle the region is that the Indians roamed pretty far and were a pretty big nuisance for the Mexican government. And so they were kind of looking for large amounts of people that they could use as kind of bullet sponges is a very vulgar way of putting it, but in a certain sense that could give them a little bit more room and legibility to expand and integrate these vast territories that in many cases were extremely sparsely populated. So how does the Alamo go from garrison to figuring into our story?
So in 1820, there were 3,500 Spaniards. By 1836, when the Alamo happens, there's 35,000 Americans. So the Spanish and then the Mexicans, when you moved, so Stephen F. Austin, he was actually really good at keeping this promise to the Mexican government. When you moved to his colonies, you had to convert to Catholicism and you had to speak Spanish. He was good at keeping that promise for most of his upstanding colonists. He called them his family. But eventually, over time, by the time you get to 36, when there's 35,000 Americans, they kind of ignored both of those things, and the laws have changed a little bit. So the laws were easier to read, and Spanish wasn't mandatory anymore because they outnumbered the Spaniards 10 times, actually. And so by the time the Alamo happens, actually right before the Alamo happens in 1835, Santa Anna's brother-in-law, I got to look for his name, but his last name is C.O.S. Coes. He tried to invade the town of, well, now I'm lost in my notes here. He tried to invade the town, I think, of Gonzales, and the Texan colonists pushed him all the way back to San Antonio. And then San Antonio was separate from the Alamo. The little river separated it. San Antonio was a small little town with a plaza. And the Americans fought door to, like, house to house, pushed these troops of Coes back into the Alamo, which was a terrible place because it was run down. Before our Alamo happens, we built it up into a fortress. But at that time, it was nothing. So Coes and his men, they get surrounded and they surrender. And then we take it over, and, or I guess not we, the Texans take it over. And they assume, because at this time they were wanting concessions from the Santa Anna, who was pretty much a dictator down in DF or Mexico City. And so they're like, okay, we kicked out his brother-in-law. We didn't kill too many troops. We killed a bunch, but not too many. They went home. We armed them to go home to fight the, whatever Indians they ran into, probably the Lipan Apaches. And so they go home, and a bunch of Texans are like, all right, we'll get our way now because we did really well in this campaign. But Sam Houston, it was like, no, they're going to come back and retaliate hard, which they did with 6,000 troops, which is why the Alamo happened. So at that time, the Alamo was nothing. When Coes left, he left over 20 cannons, and some smart Texans occupied it, built up parapets, built up palisades, built cannon platforms, built turrets. They built roofs. I mean, they made it into a fortress with over 20 cannons. And so that's kind of where the Alamo comes in to the revolution story. In 1835, they fought a small battle. The Texans won. 1836, Santa Anna himself comes in with 6,000 troops, and he wins that one.
So one of the things I do want to step in and point out is that this is just with respect to how you look at maps and that sort of thing. So if you look on a map today of really this whole area, the area that we're referring to here. So there's a couple of things that maps do. First of all, you look at a map today, and it is going to show you Texas, and Texas is huge. Okay, it's gigantic, and this sort of relates somewhat to recent news, because if you go look at the area of Texas where Jasmine Crockett won the Democratic primary, you will be able to see this zone that I'm about to talk about here pop out in perfect relief. Okay, and it's gonna create nearly a perfect outline of East Texas. When Texas was considered in the 1830s, in the 1810s, 1820s, 1830s, those counties that are blobbed out right there are more or less all that Americans really conceived of as Texas. This is the only part of Texas that significant numbers of people live in. Certainly the only part of Texas that large numbers of white people lived in. Okay. And one of the things, there's a couple of things to contextualize exactly what's happening here that are really interesting. Now, you also have to remember that, so you have this map of the United States, and we own Louisiana after 1803. So Texas is butting right up against this area that the United States has suddenly acquired and is operating out of a base in New Orleans. And I noticed Riley also did this. He referred to the Texans as Americans. That's how easy it is to go ahead and make this slip. And that slip was being made as far back as the 1820s. One of the things people don't really know about America's annexation attempts after the American Revolution is we did a lot of things that you might call purchases that weren't necessarily really purchases. And actually, the entire subject of this border with Spain, is the dominant issue in Southern politics from the time of the Revolution, because New England is fine, or the borders that police the northern territorial acquisitions in the northern states and the northern colonies are a lot more drawn in ink than the ones in the South are. It's frequently like some surveyor's line in the middle of a forest. And you don't really know what happens, but there's always these issues. The Spanish first, and then the British being on the frontier. And as we push west, we did my favorite example of the kind of literal land grabs we were doing at the time. Involves one of these characteristic. You really almost have to call them filibusters. One of these filibuster ordeals that was pulled off by a guy that I used to use as a pseudonym, Fulwar Skipwith, who was a cousin of Thomas Jefferson, kind of a layabout, somehow managed to marry a third-rate Flemish princess, and then he got his cousin to give him a job as the diplomatic envoy to Guadalupe or something. He gets to Guadalupe, discovers that Guadalupe has been destroyed by a hurricane, and then he, without any money and no way to send a letter back to Washington asking for money, he catches a boat to New Orleans, and that's pretty much where he stayed until he got some land, moved north into the area across the lake from New Orleans, and immediately started fomenting revolution against the Spanish. And what happens is there's this instance of revolution. It's relatively bloodless, where American farmers overtake the Spanish colonial government, declare the free and independent Republic of West Florida, and then 21 days later, the Americans move in and annex it. Okay, so the things to remember is that, first of all, you're at the very western edge of anything that could be considered American. And then if you consider Mexico, you're at the very furthest north extreme of the Mexican Empire. And you're almost, I think I've done the math on this before, you're actually almost as far from Mexico City when you're in San Antonio as you are from Washington, D.C., or it's comparable. So in comparative terms, what we're talking about is an event that's happening at the absolute edge of these two empires, and it's in a relatively lawless area. To this day, this area of East Texas and West Louisiana is kind of lawless, right along the Sabine River. And it's important to note that the white people that move in, they are in fact fleeing something. These are the Scots-Irish. They're the westward bound migrants who are attempting to find land that is less restrictive on them than the U.S. government is, which this is sort of incredible to believe that there was a group of people that thought the American government in the 1820s and 1830s was a totalitarian regime. But Jeffersonians have existed, since the dawn of time. And what's sort of happening is they're moving west along these wagon trails through an area that was covered almost from the Carolinian coast all the way to central Texas, was covered flatly by what we call the southern coastal plain, which was densely populated with pretty much nothing but longleaf pine. So this is all forest. It's all very heavy, very spooky forest. And there's nobody else living there. There's some outposts along the Mississippi River, but by and large, these people are left on their own. And the very few Mexicans who live this far north of Mexico City are also pretty on their own. And the actual occasion of the Americans being invited in was actually a play on the part of the Mexican government to do Indian fighting, because they had issues with the tribes that immediately composted their northern frontier. And they initially invited the Americans in as literal mercenaries, okay, with one of the conditions being that they fight off the Indians. And this is the high age of the Comanches and Blood Meridian and that sort of thing. If you imagine Blood Meridian, the setting of Blood Meridian, that is what you're walking into when you talk about the Alamo. And Grant Brooks is talking about the movie versions of it, with a great one with John Wayne, and there's another one, Billy Bob Thornton. The actual thing is very rinky dink. Yeah, the whole thing is there are not many people here. They are spread all over the place. To say that this is, I mean, yeah, on nominally on a map, these things all like look nice and pretty, and if you're looking at them from either Mexico City or from Washington DC, they do look like lines on a map. But as with all things, the closer you get, especially with these lines on this map, the closer you get to them, it really gets hard to describe, really gets hard to figure out whose motivations are whose. Almost everyone who's involved has their own personal set of motivations that they're draping a flag across. And
so I've got
the stories it comes. Yeah, go for it.
I've got so I didn't know this, but when I did my Zebulon Pike series, I'm going to read a quote real quick from 1799, which happened even before the Louisiana Purchase. So this is from Lieutenant Jose Cortez, Spanish Lieutenant Jose Cortez in 1799. The other nation that demands our vigilant caution and forces us to contain, in part, its expansion, is the new power known as the Republic of the United Anglo-American Provinces. These states, which have risen so suddenly to such a colossal height, have extended to points so dangerously near and surround us so closely that we must fear the expansion of their borders over Louisiana and Florida and their proximity to the province of Texas, where they can enter undetected. So we bought Louisiana in 1803, even though Napoleon promised the Spanish he wouldn't sell it. He needed money because he just failed in Haiti. So we bought it. Jefferson asked Napoleon, what are the boundaries of Louisiana? And Napoleon pretty much said, it's whatever you make it. So Jefferson said, the boundary of Louisiana then is the Rio Grande, which means we get Albuquerque, we get Santa Fe, and we get Taos and all of Texas. Obviously, the Spanish said no. By 1805, Spain invaded Louisiana, our side of the Sabine River, twice. Thomas Jefferson and Dearborn almost went to war with Spain in 1805. And then again in 1806. And then after that, the Spanish arrested us. Every single Anglo that walked into Texas or New Mexico was arrested, sent down to Chihuahua, or sent back to the States. I mean,
so that was another reason why Zebulon Pike was sent by Jefferson, is there was an understanding that if he was captured, he was actually going to see a lot more of the Spanish territory than if he just went in and out.
And he got back and he wrote everything.
Yep.
And he said, with 20,000 American volunteers, we could take the entirety of northern Mexico. He said that in 1807 in his book. And then fast forward 40 years and we did.
Well, and so even his quote, right, about like Florida, by the time of the Texas Revolution, Florida has already been annexed by the United States. Andrew Jackson, who is kind of the champion of the Scots-Irish, has already marched into the state. And then there's a treaty and there's
Adams
a purchase. Treaty. But effectively, we just took Florida.
On the pretense that we didn't want England to use it as a base during the War of 1812.
Right. And it is really worth dwelling on some of these people. The figures like Davy Crockett that we know are descendants or relatives of other famous figures that you might remember from the Revolution, people like Daniel Boone. These are the people who are coming through the Cumberland Gap, and these are a lot of the people who are coming to Texas because, as Christopher Sandbatch has already enlightened us, even the United States did not have enough land and placed too much restrictions in their mind on what they were looking for. And even after the Texas Revolution, to the point about fighting the Apaches, even after the Texas Revolution and after annexation, the Americans are still sort of regarded by the Mexican government as one of the only answers. I think the Texas Rangers specifically, there was a quote that I remember reading from some of the northern Mexican governors that essentially the Texas Rangers were more or less the only only help you could get in terms of some of these more warlike tribes that just had their way in northern Mexico.
That would have been the Lipan Apaches at this time and the Karankawas, among others.
Yes. Yeah, and it's sort of interesting too, because even the Washington D.C. comparison, right? It's like, yeah, Washington D.C. and Mexico City, but the route to get from Washington D.C. to Texas was a lot easier than the route to get from Mexico City to Texas. It was a
El
lot
Camino
less
Real.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So Davy Crockett came to Texas right days before the Alamo that we know happened. And he got there, and the leader of the Alamo, Travis, the military leader, he said, "Do you want to command?" And Crockett said, "No. I have come to aid you all that I can in your noble cause, and all the honor that I desire is that of defending as a high private the liberties of our common country." And he got there days before.
It was understood too, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, that Crockett, had he wished to, could have snuck away during the siege, and he chose not to do so. He chose to fight to the end.
Travis asked all 183 or so men, because it became clear their options were, we fight and we die, or you can leave now. And only one man left, a Napoleonic War veteran. Oh shoot, I can't find him with a French name. He was the only man that left. He snuck past enemy lines. I didn't look up what his later life was, but everyone else stayed, knowing they were going to die. And Travis sent the very famous note that ends in.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you want to read the Travis letter? Because it's not long
Yes.
at all, and it's,
It
I
is
think, pretty
not.
compelling.
It is fantastic. But now I have to search through my little notes here and find it. But it is really great. Okay.
Here, I can go
To
ahead.
the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then, I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible. And die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his honor, his own honor, and that of his country. Victory or death. And that was underlined 3 times. Victory or death.
One of the things that I remember, not necessarily about my trip to the Alamo, but the way that my father described the trip, is he said he had always kind of found Texans to be brash and kind of I don't know, big doesn't quite adequately describe it. I think brash is probably the best way of describing it. And knowing kind of our family history, that makes a little bit more sense. But he made a remark after visiting the Alamo that was basically the "I get it" meme. Like, this actually was in many ways a founding moment for Texas and for Texans, for what sort of people they were going to be. Because yes, we can refer to them as Americans. Texans are Americans, but they're really something more. And I think, a lot of states want to claim that. Every state wants to claim, right, we're unique. And there's a long history prior to the war between the states of identifying with one state even above before the United States. But Texas has kind of a unique history and a unique mimetic power to inspire that Texans, it just, to borrow a phrase from a different thing, it just means more.
Texas is like everywhere else but bigger.
So true. So true. Do we want to talk at all about? Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Do we want to talk at all about the aftermath of the Alamo and how the Texans sort of avenged the Alamo?
Yeah. Yeah.
My 11,000 words only go to the end of the Alamo. I mean, I guess I wrote about Sam Houston, maybe apocryphally, but they definitely shouted it. But he said when I think it was San Jacinto, right before the battle, he said, victory is certain, trust in God and fear not. The victims of the Alamo and the names of those who were murdered at Goliad cry out for vengeance. Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad. And then his troops yell, remember the Alamo. And then that was used on the front line in the rest of the war, or the revolution, I should say.
A phrase that we should remember. Remember the Alamo. It's interesting to me too. There's sort of the meme understanding of peoples, right? Like the very vulgar understanding of peoples, that the capture of Santa Anna that is affected in the Battle of San Jacinto, Santa Anna is literally caught napping. Very very med coded, dare we say.
I had fun kind of researching Santa Anna, who was a womanizer, an opium user. He called himself the Napoleon of the West, which, I mean, that's pretty me.
Yeah, it captured to Mexico. Just sort of like is kind of, I guess we have to do this. But Santa Anna is, I don't know that he's the first in a line of this, but he's the first that comes to mind for me of a certain type of strong man in Mexico that is very notable in the 19th century and even into the early 20th century. These figures that sort of bend all of Mexican politics around themselves. And hearing about Santa Anna and his quotes and his accomplishments, right? It's kind of understandable. He is this kind of larger than life figure, but it serves as something of a stark difference between the United States and Mexico. And it's not to say that America doesn't have strong leaders. Obviously, Andrew Jackson is a figure kind of like this, but just not to the same severity at all. It's one of the key differences that is remarked upon by political theorists of the time. My memory is drawn particularly to a quote. This is in the constitutions of these peoples and why bringing them together might not be the greatest idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Santa Anna, just before this Texas Revolution, fought and won a civil war against Bustamante, I think he was his name, the then dictator. And then as soon as he won the war, he went back on his promises and Europeans invaded, and then he came back.
That's another interesting thing to talk about, the very brief French control of Mexico, because it's the French who invade during the American Civil War, right?
It was all of Europe. Even the English invaded until they realized what Napoleon III's aims were, which was to just conquer it. Because the English and most Europeans came to extract debts that Mexico owed them. And then when it became clear that Napoleon III was using Maximilian as emperor and was going to put him in power, most European countries left, but the French stayed and backed Maximilian. And yeah, no, I can't get into that. He could have done the South a real big help there, but he would have been invaded on the continent if he had. So,
Sandbatch, I know you're something of an expert in this field. So maybe do you want to talk about the interplay between the United States and the European powers as regards things like the Europeans trying to collect their debts via invasions of South and Central America? This is something that happens not just in Mexico, but is sort of a political, I don't know, a political decision point for much of the world in the 19th and 20th century.
Well, I mean, the thing you have to remember is that by far the most important thing, it's easy again, I always talk about map brain. You look at maps and you see them in a certain way, and you think of maps of the 19th century, and they all shake out, and they're nice and colored, and you get like Paul Fahrenheit brain, or like Hearts of Iron brain, or something like that. You tend to look at it and you see, okay, that's what that looked like. But not all empires are created the same, and certainly, and not all maps of maps of empires tend to be created quite the same. But the empires that they represent aren't all the same. And in the early 19th century, there are only really two empires that are in town. There are only really two empires that matter at all. Okay. The end of the American Revolution more or less bankrupted the French and took the Spanish were already reeling, took them more or less out. They have their South American provinces, but those are, reduced to almost little more than a formality at this point already. But the two empires that managed to survive the American Revolution, ironically, are the British, who are delivered this incredible consolation prize of India at the end, through the efforts of Warren Hastings. And then the other empire that didn't participate at all, which is Russia. Okay. So with respect to Europe and with respect to the map that is like changing hands, America is here, but like you have to remember also that the American army was like 3 brigades at this point. We're not a serious player in any sense of the word, except when one of those other two much larger empires doesn't care what we're doing. And luckily for us, that's most of the time. But occasionally Russia and Britain will get incredibly interested in things the United States is doing. And this is one of those times. So when you look at when you look at all of the maneuvering that's done on the map between the British and the Americans and the Russian colonies in the Pacific Northwest, one of the things you always have to remember is that the British are active and interested all over in doing one thing and one thing only, which is maintain their naval hegemony in the Atlantic Basin. And they have a lot of other list of asks and wants too, but above all else, keeping the empire solvent and keeping their naval hegemony in the Atlantic Basin to enforce the gold standard is what they're about doing. And the Russians are frequently in opposition to them with respect to political issues that nobody in America has ever heard about. But the state of play is that all of the players that are involved here occasionally have to turn around and look up at what Britain and Russia are doing. And so you can always reliably find a Russian and British or a great game angle in the territorial squabblings that are occurring throughout the hemisphere at this time. Was that what you were asking for? Was that the kind of take you wanted?
Sure. I mean, that definitely gets us more in this context. I was thinking a little bit later, but that's mostly because of a bias of what I've been reading recently. I find the whole subject to be interesting. Even our, I believe at this time there is an American desire to be friends with Russia. Maybe I'm totally off base there, but I seem to remember that from like John Quincy Adams or so. I think that's interesting in light of obviously Russia during this time. This is still the Great Game, I think, or maybe the beginning of it between Russia.
This is the beginning of it, really. The Great Game never ends. But yeah. So one of the things that's interesting is that, America's oldest geopolitical ally really is Russia. Russia is I think Frederick the Great was the first European autocrat to actually recognize American independence. But the Russians, as a function of their, two cats in the same, two wet cats in a cage relationship with the British, means they are always interested in establishing relationships that are oppositional, at least cordial in an oppositional way to the British. Now, the thing with John Quincy Adams was he was an ambassador to Russia, and so he had. I don't know that he had Russian sympathies. It's probably wrong to say that he had Russian sympathies, but unlike Thomas Jefferson and John C. Calhoun and James Monroe, who once tried to start a war with Russia and Prussia at the same time over the abstract concept of monarchy in Hungary, he was a little bit more realistic in terms of how he dealt with the European powers, and especially with Russia, because he knew exactly what they were capable of. So he's probably to say that he's more sympathetic, and to say that there's a more sympathetic to Russia strain in American politics at the time is probably overstepping the boundaries. But there is a faction. You maybe better break down the factions of Americans with respect to this issue. Is say there's a handful of Americans who have had day-to-day working relations with one of the great powers of Europe, with one of the legitimate, huge, great powers, and they have a all too prescient idea of exactly how delicate the United States' existence is. And then there is a group of Jeffersonian lunatics who don't give a shit about any of that, and they are essentially continuing the abstract revolution against the monarchical principle
forever.
Yeah, forever.
Do you want to hear a good quote from Thomas Jefferson from 1809?
Fuck yeah. Absolutely.
We should have such an empire for liberty as she has never surveyed since creation. And I am persuaded no constitution was ever before so well calculated as ours for extensive empire and self-government.
Yeah, now that's a beautiful one. That's probably one of the most maddening things that has ever been uttered in the history of American statecraft, because of that incredible phrase, the empire of liberty, that is like set people to arguing about what the hell Thomas Jefferson meant by that since the beginning.
Especially Southerners took it to heart. If I have learned one thing in my researching for my 5 years of my show, the Empire of Liberty, it probably died with the Confederacy, but I mean, every action anyone took, from the filibusterers to Zebulon Montgomery Pike to even the Texans, who constantly talked about liberty and ending tyranny and monarchy, even though Mexico wasn't a monarchy. I mean, that one phrase, especially Southerners, they just wanted to spread the revolution forever. Even after seeing what the revolution did in Haiti and eventually, France.
Well, maybe not Haiti.
But that's
no, yeah.
Well,
what do we mean? What do we mean when we say the revolution? Though, like, what do we mean when we say the revolution? Because this is, it's absolutely true. And I think, God, if you look at a map of the people that were involved, if you look at a map of the people who were involved with, if you look at a map of the people who were involved at the Alamo, you find it's almost entirely Southerners. This is totally true. That is 100, and this is the result of Thomas Jefferson. This is the Jeffersonian strain of Southern thought.
I have 5 quotes from people involved talking about spreading liberty.
But one of the things you have to remember is that what Southerners mean by liberty is like somewhat porous at best. We don't have, like, we're the portion of Southerners are the portion of Americans who are more prone to abstract idealist thinking. We're more prone to reading words and finding our own self-interest embedded in them. We're more political by nature. And so whenever we say something like the revolution, by revolution against the abstract monarchical principle, we absolutely might just mean, I think there's a silver mine over there. We can just take it. Okay.
Are we all
that's the filibuster, right? I mean, that's the filibusters. That's what they're all about. And like, realistically, too, I mean, extending it to Haiti, I just think is not realistic, because during this era, people had a very clear-eyed that The most delicate way I can put it is people are different, and that's okay.
No,
And some
I'm sorry.
people
I didn't
are
mean that we
constitutionally cut out.
purposely spread it to Haiti. It just spread itself through the French Revolution to Haiti. I didn't mean that we wanted it in Haiti. We did not want it in Haiti.
Yeah, that's maybe fair.
It just, I call it on my show, probably shouldn't, the virus of democracy. It spread from us to France, then to Haiti, and then through the Americas, and then eventually Europe.
But right, it's like one of those things. It's like what do we mean by that in the first place? Now, the thing about Haiti is that Haiti gets an asterisk, and this is actually my field. My field is like it's revolution. It's the history of revolutions in the Atlantic world, and Haiti is definitely one of them. The thing about Haiti is it gets such an asterisk in so many different ways. Like, I mean, yeah, okay. There's like it's the only one of these.
Absolutely.
It's the only one of these. It's the only one of these places done by blacks, and that's true in one sense, but that's just like one of the weird asterisks that Haiti gets. Like, first of all, as an island, it's like the most brutal place you could have ever lived. They're doing sugar refining, which is considerably more brutal than any other like possible regime.
I know we've all kind of lost the taste for Dan Carlin, even though his show is still good, but he has a really good episode on, even though some of that's been debunked. But yeah, being a slave in Haiti, that was
it's miserable.
No good.
It's miserable. You have to, and then there are so many other there's so many other issues going on here, which is the French also have this slavery code, which makes it's almost as if you gave ChatGPT LSD and got the worst history professor you have ever heard of come up with the actual meaning of the Haitian Revolution. There's wicked, there's overt satanic shit happening. There's a stream of white people coming out of Haiti saying don't look at that one, don't touch that one. There's all these slave power, which is what they called Southerners at the time. We're looking at that one going, yeah, cool, monarchical principle, but we had a lot of slaves too, and we don't want them to revolt. So Haiti gets an asterisk with respect to all these other it's almost like this biohazard taped off thing that happened in a ball, and everyone else is just kind of like drawing a big question mark around it.
Yeah, I totally agree, and everyone at the time agreed too. They feared it would spread to New Orleans, and then from New Orleans to Charleston, and then throughout the entire southern states. Yeah.
Well, it is
totally a valid.
Yeah.
It's totally a valid fear too. This the kind of thing did happen.
And the English were openly advocating for slaves in the South to revolt and arming the Indians in the North. So I mean, that's a little bit.
Yeah, it's like I said, but people will also, they'll try to draw really hard. They'll try to draw moralistic interpretations around British proclamations, and they're really playing the same game the British were playing back at the time. If you remember what I said a minute ago, whatever the British talk about doing with respect to slavery and so on and so forth, what they're really interested in doing is, in the words of Shakespeare, is to set. Oh God, how do I lose it?
Keeping hegemony.
Now, well, yeah, they're trying to set the smaller Indian tribes against one another, so the big Indian tribe doesn't have to worry about it. So they'll say, and this is one of these things, is that when you're looking at American-British relations, you always have to remember that okay, whatever Parliament is doing, there's also a consortium of industrialists in northern England that are functionally a second British government operating more or less with total impunity. So not only do you have to remember that, what the British Empire is this giant sort of commercial adventure that theoretically has a government, but all the government's interested in doing is keeping British hegemony in the Atlantic basin. And most of the time, the northern industrialists are just trying to get their money, or just trying to make sure the endless flow of cotton and cash from the New World doesn't dry up. So whatever they're saying it's always worth remembering that those are their two real motives, and that
they're kind of a clearinghouse, you might say.
Yeah, and these factions in the British government, they act independently of one another, and they're perfectly capable of being in opposition to one another for periods of time as well, as long as the British keep naval hegemony in the Atlantic basin to continue forcing one country after another onto the gold standard.
Well, it's notable too. I mean, even the what the British are doing with us in terms of like setting the natives on the Indians on the frontier against us is the same strategy that the French did against the British that helped bring about the 7 Years' War. That gives us that incredible quote from William Pitt where he says something to the effect of "I alone can save England." And by save England, he means save that naval hegemony, because in the early days of that war, things are not going so well. And now it's my turn to kill the conversation. I don't know,
when you kill it, you got to restart it. Yeah, that's
I can bring it back here. So
yeah, let's loop it back to something.
Yeah,
tangential.
I'm going to bring it back to the final days of this. I think it was 11 or 13-day siege of the Alamo, because we've gotten a little far afield. Maybe we can, because we mentioned the importance of the Alamo and what it did and the time frame that it happened, but the Alamo itself, the final battle, is pretty incredible. And interrupt me whenever you want. I'm not going to read what I wrote. But I'll kind of like skim it here. But it mostly happened in early March of 1866. And after like 11 days, by March 4th, the Mexicans, they're approaching 6,000 now, have completely surrounded the Alamo, and they're 250 yards away. And they've got all their cannons, and they are firing at the walls that one of the Texans built. To fortify. It was Green Jameson was his name, to fortify the fort. And they're going around patching all of the holes. The next morning, they're 200 yards away. It's the 5th now. And they all know there's no reinforcements coming. There's no cavalry coming across the hill to intercept them, the Mexicans at their back. So they go to sleep that night on the 5th, and it is the last night they will ever sleep, because no man survives. And 4 a.m. on the 6th, the Mexicans, they had split into 4 columns. Each column had about 800 men. They are surrounding the Alamo. One's going to attack the south wall. 2 are going to attack the north wall. And one's going to attack this palisade that Green Jameson had built. And that's where Davy Crockett and his 25 Tennessee sharpshooters are standing. And so at 4 a.m, they're waiting. It's cold. At 5 a.m, one stands up, apparently, and yells, "Viva Santa Anna!" And then the bugle sounds, and they storm the Alamo. Green Jameson had built up the walls around it. He had made it a fortress, like I said earlier. The first few waves, we had all the cannons that Santa Anna's brother-in-law, Coase, had left. And so we had built platforms for them to fire over the wall. And we were just using grape shot, and by grape shot I mean horseshoes broken down into tiny little bits. All the metal they could find in San Antonio de Bexar, they put into little bits, stuffed it in the cannon, and then fired at the Mexicans, and we would end up killing 1,500 or about that. The first 3 waves completely fail, and then the 2 columns that were attacking the north merge into one, and then the other column that was attacking the west, where Crockett and his men were, they merged. So there's this giant mass of Mexicans against the wall, and the cannons can't fire down. And if the Americans look over the wall to shoot, they finally took their first casualties after 13 days at this time, even though the Mexicans have been firing cannons for over a week now. And so the Mexicans eventually scale the wall. I believe the main guy was Amadores, or whatever his name was. They climb the wall. They get in there. They kind of force all the Amador. They force. He climbs a wall with hundreds behind him. He goes to a gate, opens the gate, hundreds flood into the gate. So there's 180 something Texans and Americans actually, that are inside this plaza in this gated, fortified old mission that had a barracks that the Mexicans built, 2 barracks, a small one and a 2-story one. And they're all flooding into the plaza. The Texans fight off as much as they can. It's hand-to-hand combat. The Texans go into the long barracks. I'm just going to call them Americans from now on. They go into the long barracks where they built up walls so they can shoot out but not get shot at. And on top of the buildings, the Americans turn the cannons into the plaza with grape shot and kill hundreds of Mexicans. Their bodies stack upon each other, just getting sprayed by grape shot. But as they flood in, the other cannons, they become unguarded. And so the Mexicans turn them on the long barracks. They shoot the fortifications out. They flood into it, Camp of the State style, and bayonet every American in long barracks. Jim Bowie, creator of the Bowie knife, by that point he had really bad tuberculosis. He was a raging alcoholic, not judging or anything, and he was sitting on a cot in the low barracks, and he was bayoneted until the Mexicans' brand new white uniforms, which Santa Anna had. He spent $7.5 million in 1835 money on. He completely emptied the Mexican treasury on building his army, and now he was using it to invade Texas after he killed and took over his opponents in Mexico. And so these white uniforms are turning red as they're just bayoneting all of these Texans and Americans. They get through the long barracks, they get through the low barracks, they kill every American, no one is spared. They break down the wall of the old mission, and that's where about 25 women, children, and slaves, a couple old men are in there. And all the men are killed. Only the women and children and slaves are left alive. And at the end, we've got 183 dead Americans, or possibly more. There's a great quote by one of the Mexicans who thought he saw Davy Crockett, and he even says it by name, except, wrong. But at one point or later after the war, he would write that, I happened to scroll through my stuff here. He was a tall American of rather dark complexion and had on a long buckskin coat and a round cap without any bill, made out of fox skin with a long tail hanging down his back. This man apparently had a charmed life. Of the many soldiers who took deliberate aim at him and fired, not one ever hit him. On the contrary, he never missed a shot. He killed at least 8 of our men, besides wounding several others. This being observed by a lieutenant who had come in over the wall, he sprang at him and dealt him a deadly blow with his sword just above the right eye, which felled him to the ground, and in an instant he was pierced by not less than 20 bayonets. Now, before long, every American was dead. They spared the women and children. Santa Anna would send one of Travis's men, his wife, and their 15-month-old daughter, and a slave. He would send them up to not San Felipe de Austin, but Washington on the Brazos, to the fledgling government, which hadn't declared itself a republic yet, but he sent her up there and said, "This is going to happen to all who oppose me. So go tell everyone that you're all going to die. I'm going to the Sabine," which at that time was the border with America. And 183 Texans dead, Alamo was gone, and 1,500 Mexicans were dead. Santa Anna would burn the bodies of every American.
I think it's notable, an event like this, it sticks in the mind of Americans, and I think Anglos generally, maybe even Westerners generally, as particularly notable because the way that warfare was traditionally conducted is that there was a lot of fighting, but the death tolls typically were not that bad unless an army turned tail and ran. That's where it became a killing field. So as long as you were brave, generally, there was an understanding that you had a pretty good shot to survive. And so this event obviously is not the case. The Americans, the Texans, fight to the end. They fight very honorably and bravely, more bravely than anyone necessarily would have expected of them. And they're killed to a man. And the effect that this has on the Texans and the Americans, I think, is really notable. I think there's strong comparisons between the Texas Revolution and the American Revolution in terms of a figure like Sam Houston being able to, like, just the mental fortitude of not only Sam Houston, but of his army and of the people to endure an event like this and to come back and win. I think it speaks to the spirit of Texans and the spirit of Americans in a very powerful way that is maybe still with us today.
I think you're right. It does. It does. Travis, the head of the garrison at the Alamo for the Texans, he sent a message asking if he could parlay with Santa Anna. But before he could do that, Jim Bowie, he sent a message saying, "Hey, if we all surrender, can you let us go back home, and we'll disarm and go back home?" And Santana said, "I want unconditional surrender." And then Travis sent a letter that said, "Hey, can we parlay?" And Santana said, "I want unconditional surrender." And then he hoisted the red flag in the town square of San Antonio de Bexar, which they could see from the Alamo, which meant no quarter. I mean, they knew their only option was death.
And this is where even the story is very personal to me of Davy Crockett, who, knowing what was coming and knowing that he personally could escape had he desired to do so, but he chooses not to. He chooses to fight to the end.
At one point, I think the day before the Mexicans sieged, again, I'm not gonna be able to find it, but he said essentially, "Why don't we just go out and meet them in the field? I don't like being hemmed up in this fort." He knew even before the final siege.
Indeed. Is there anything else either of you two really want to talk about related to this specifically?
Related to this specifically, no, not really. Actually, y'all covered it pretty well. But I do have something to shill for once.
I got one thing
All
real quick,
right.
Sandbatch. Sorry.
Yeah.
The entire siege lasted less than 90 minutes. That's all I got.
That morning, you're saying, from
Yeah, that morning on March 6th, 1866. 1836, I apologize.
Well, with that said, remember the Alamo, brave patriots. Remember the Alamo. And
Remember
let's
the
do
Alamo.
our shilling and get out of here. Oh yes,
Oh, you
super
gotta
chats.
you gotta read the super chats, man. I don't even know how to do that.
Oh, I don't either. I mean, we're gonna have to have some technical help here.
Professional podcasters, ladies and gentlemen.
I told you I'm not good at this. Everybody's like, I was whenever we started doing this, it's like, oh, who's going to be the actual host? I've been doing this for 10 years. Still, like the second time I went on a live stream, I was on with AA by myself, and he like dropped out, and I just went dead silent. I'd already been doing this for 5 years at the time. I'm a remarkably
You're telling
bad.
me he invited you on a podcast and then just like left you hanging?
Well, no, he had like issues. He had like technical issues or something like that. And I was left there
Oh,
with
okay.
thousands of watchers just on dead air. But yeah, no, I'm remarkably bad as a first chair. I don't like people always ask me, why don't you have your own show? I'm not a real great host, you know, because I have to talk the whole time when you're the host. Like people who do the like, it's like in show business. It was called the straight man and the color man. Clearly, we don't call him that anymore for obvious reasons. But there's the straight man who's like he's the guy. The straight man is the guy who just like moves the show along, you know. And then there's like the Howard Cosell guy who's there to entertain people. I make a much better entertaining people like person than I do a host. You know, it's like rhythm and lead guitar. When I played guitar, when I played in bands, I was a rhythm guitar player. Never a lead.
All right.
I'm also not married. I'm only ever going to be a bridesmaid.
Well, I'm sure you
Have
make
you got
a pretty bridesmaid. I'll say that.
Yeah.
I've got the super chats.
Yeah.
All right. From Solid Snake 1964, $5. Evening, gents. Unfortunately, I have not been to the Alamo yet, but I hope to change that someday. When someday I do, I hope one of you gentlemen in the Blackland Prairie Riders will join me and give me a great tour of the area. Remember the Alamo. And he salutes. We have
real Americans
from Christopher Burks 458, $5, and that's just a salute. Salute you back, sir.
Real Americans.
From
like
Steve 220. What's up? What were you going to say, Sandy?
Oh no! You keep going.
Okay, from Skibum 220, $50. I visited the Alamo in 2015. It is a proud symbol of American heritage. We will win. We must win. Salute the OGC and the heroes of Texas.
Real Americans.
Amen.
Could not have said it myself.
Amen. Thank you, sir.
From Eagle Scout Warlord, $5. I first learned about the Alamo from the old Disney Davy Crockett movie. I have a great dad, but as a Texan, he failed to teach me about it first. I'm trying to remember the first time I heard about it.
That's mind blowing. You know, I knew a guy. He's like, this is like when I think of Texas dad. This is the guy I'm thinking of. He actually ended up doing some legal representation for some our guy associated groups. But he was such a Texas dude that he brought dirt with him from Texas, and every time one of his kids were born, he threw it underneath the hospital bed so that all of his kids could say they were born on Texas soil.
Incredible.
Yeah,
that is awesome. May that sort of American never perish from the earth.
Well, you know, unfortunately, they're very susceptible to beans in chili, and that'll take them right out.
I live in New Mexico now.
It's Greater Texas, dare we say?
Don't let any native New Mexicans hear that. I'm from Georgia, so I got no skin in the game.
This is like the difference, Louis. And I'm down here in Louisiana, being like, please come play, please, Norman Bloodsurp, fucking like chairman of the Texas House of Representatives, please bomb Baton Rouge and annex the entire state of Louisiana. We do not deserve sovereignty.
The siege of Shreveport.
My mom's family from Louisiana.
Yeah.
All right, from Seasider 1, $10. Where's the basement? Aren't you guys going to talk about the basement? And he salutes.
Real Americans.
If there's a basement at the Alamo, I don't know. I got kicked out before I got to see it.
I never, in my extensive day and a half research, did not hear about a basement. He can't respond.
I can't say I have either.
I don't know. I'm going to look it up now.
From Kyle Linslog, G8U, 1999, and he gives us a salute.
Real Americans.
From Volpersona, $5. He also gives us a salute.
Real Americans.
And Sandy, you're gonna like the last one from Felix Fairmont, who's also an OGC man. $2. Where is the Grateful Dead OGC deep dive?
We can actually do that one day. That would be really fun. But I never talk about the Dead because, I do talk about the Dead, but I never give anybody a chance to actually really go into it because it just offends everyone. Like, it offends the hippies, it offends the right wing, it offends everyone. So the only person I could get to listen to me talk about it is Capitalismo.
See, I'm so
Oh yeah.
I'm such a zoomer that I didn't really know about the Grateful Dead prior to you talking my ear off about them. And it was one of those things that I was just like, yeah, I'm just not interested in that. So I just tuned it out. But then I just started getting the morphine drip of their involvement in literally everything and everyone. Like stumbling across these clips of Tucker Carlson looking like he's 23 years old, wearing a bow tie, talking about the Grateful Dead and these interviews that he's doing on television. It's like, what the hell?
Did y'all read Andy Edwards' Crowbar?
I have not.
Okay, it's real good, but yeah, there's some Grateful Dead references in there.
They seem like a sort of cartilage that goes through an enormous amount of Americana for the last several decades. I still haven't really listened to their music, but anyway. All right, that does us for super chats, unless we have any okay, we have one last one, also from Felix Fairmont. He sends another $2. Thank you, gents, for the history lesson, and he salutes.
Real Americans.
Salute.
I got to hang out with him a couple weekends ago. He's a good guy.
Speaking for myself,
never met Felix. I've never met Felix, but I did get to meet all the Sons of Wisconsin this weekend. They were cool as hell.
I saw that you were up there. I lived there for 8 years, man. Well, you were in the
Oh, I forgot it. No, actually, I thought of that. Well, I mean, you were in Michigan. I thought of you because I had the most wonderful hosts, and I had the best time. You could almost track it via Twitter, and then I stopped posting more. I stopped posting as much. I got about 3 days into that, and I was like, oh, too much Yankee.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I'm married in Wisconsin, half British. She's actually listening right now, so I can't talk bad about her.
Wisconsin was interesting, though, because it was very clearly a red state between two blue states.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was interesting.
It was a great 8 years, but it was too cold. I'll say that.
This dude's so cold. This is so cold. What was wild, because, just for everybody's listening, what I was doing before I finished this story, I published a book. You should go to my Twitter and follow the link and buy it. It's the first of several books that it's poetry, but people have been asking for a book from me for a long time. And so I relent and I gave you a book. But I was up in the Upper Peninsula with a friend of the club, and I have never seen anything like frozen over Great Lakes before, but I was tickled that there is in fact a very definite line past which everything is frozen and there's snow on the ground, and then it's like a scar in the sand, and underneath that it's frozen prairie. Above that line, there's snow on the ground, and it's wild.
Oh yeah,
but
very Ice Age looking up there.
Yeah, and I was in Manistee, okay, which is
I've been there. I ate at a little boy. There's
absolutely a little boy diner there. Manistee, which is it is on the north shore of Lake Michigan, and I woke up and I went out and stood. You see so much ice out there. Again, I talk about the map thing, but I was standing on the north shore of Lake Michigan, which I've always imagined as water, and to see it is just ice. And then I imagine you just turn around, and above that, north of there, about 40 miles, a whole other lake starts. And that's the
Superior.
big and it's the biggest one, you know.
Superior one.
Wild. I can't imagine Lake Superior. It's like an unfathomable other world to me. But the Upper Peninsula was beautiful. We were in the Hiawatha National Forest. So much going on. It was a good trip, but like, God, you know, I was like, even thinking on Tuesday, I was like, I could totally move to Chicago. Day 3, I was like, drenching sadness.
Our well-ringed compatriot will do that to you.
Yeah.
Living there is one thing, but the guys who go out on the lakes, like who are, work on the ships or whatever, that's like a whole nother level of just, I don't know. That's a type of bravery there too.
To quote Armageddon, scariest environment imaginable.
All right, we got another last-minute one from. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, as long as we keep talking, people keep sending us money, so we might as well keep going. I'm just kidding. No, but it's like, is the Great Lakes referred to in the film Armageddon?
No, he's talking about the surface of the asteroid. But
yeah,
one of the
it's like
Owens brothers goes, scariest environment imaginable. You can just say that, scariest environment imaginable.
Yeah, that's I've never seen anything like that. I fell down in the snow and I was like, oh man.
Okay. Totally random aside, do either of you know about like the concept of rogue waves?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh yeah.
Rogue waves are such a funny, like, perfect example of like the Reddit scientism being like, actually, we don't have any proof of this. And then only in the last century, it's like, oh yeah, no, the Great Lakes can just throw a giant wave at you that will wreck your ship, just out of nowhere.
I don't remember why it happens, but I know the ground beneath the Great Lakes, they were depressed by giant glaciers, and they're slowly rising up. And I wonder if maybe every now and then it kind of rises up a little bit too much and shoots a wave. But
well, it has something to do with the wind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm retarded.
Well, the Great Lakes, I mean, you almost can't call them rogue waves on the Great Lakes because they happen so frequently. It's like, okay, this is a known risk.
Known
but they
quantity,
they tend to happen. I think what happened, because the Great Lakes aren't very deep. They are like they're just a melted glacier, and then actually I think the Upper Peninsula I think is land that exists because it got pinched up between these two glaciers. But the way rogue waves work is like because I actually don't know how rogue waves work, but
me neither. That's why I was just BSing.
But I know a wave is as much above the surface as it is below the surface, and when something underneath them starts to crunch the wavelength from below, the top tends to crash over too. So I think that's the physics of it. But like, I'm an expert in history and I'm a poet, and you should go buy my book of poetry. You should go buy it. There's a link to it on my The Fevers and the Humors by C. Sandbatch. You should definitely go check that out.
Let's
not a scientist.
Let's read the last super chat. We can get the shilling out of the way. From King Arthur II, $5. Salute from the LCS. That's another of our OGC chapters here. Thank you very much, sir. Sandy, you've already mentioned your book. Is there anything else you want people to go check out?
Yeah, I want you to go subscribe to my Substack, Ecologica Americana. And other than that, I'm on Monday nights with Capitalissimo, also of The Club. And we do read-throughs of true crime novels.
I did not know that.
And
we call it Library of Mass Destruction, but it's the Our Guy True Crime Podcast is what it is.
Awesome.
Okay, but like when you say true crime, do we mean like actual true crime, or are we talking like
female true crime?
I don't know. Yeah, right.
We're in the middle. We're in the middle of a long exegesis on every serial killer ever, as far as I can tell. So the ladies do be loving the content.
You're gonna give Burden and Thomas a run for their money.
Hey, we finally figured out that what the Volk want is true crime. They don't want politics. Anyway, Mr. Thomas Wayne Riley, where do you want to send to people? I know about your podcast, The American Southwest. Is there anything else you want to direct people to go check out?
No, that's it. American Southwest, Thomas Wayne Riley on Substack. I make content only for subscribers, and they get the stuff early and ad-free when I have ads. And also, if you're in New Mexico and you're listening to this, please contact me. Join us, brothers. And that's all I got.
Well, I can definitely recommend his podcast. It's very good. And I haven't listened to yours, Sandy, but I've definitely read much of your Substack, and I wholeheartedly recommend that as well. As for myself, I can be found at the Old Glory Club's Substack. I contribute there periodically. And also, I do some casts for them, but I can be found just either on the OGC YouTube or on the Substack, so go check those out. Having said that, thank you all so much for joining us, and have a good night.
When I pass on my good genes to my sons, they're going to join the